Have you ever felt the urge to vanish, to retreat, to pull back, to step out of the narrative entirely because the weight of the world feels unbearable? When we disappear, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally, it's often an act of self-preservation, a way to shield ourselves from vulnerability, from judgment, from the noise of expectations. And while it might feel like the safest choice in the moment, disappearing comes with a cost, one we don't always recognize until it's too late. When we disappear, we silence our voices, we step out of connection with others, and in doing so, we lose the opportunity to be seen and heard for who we really are. Connection is the currency of humanity. It's messy, raw, and imperfect, but it's also the birthplace of belonging and love. Disappearing may protect us from pain, but it also robs us of joy. Disappearing also creates a ripple effect. Those around us feel the void we leave behind. When we step back, people may interpret our absence in ways we didn't intend. They might assume we don't care, that we've given up, or that they've done something wrong. But here's the tricky part. Disappearing isn't always about running away. Sometimes it's about not knowing how to show up. When we're overwhelmed by shame, fear, insecurity, stepping back feels like the only option. Yet, it's in those moments of doubt that showing up, imperfectly, vulnerably, is most powerful. When we disappear, we deny ourselves the gift of resilience. Every time we face discomfort and stay present, we build our capacity to handle life's storms. Disappearing might feel like a reprieve, but it also reinforces the belief that we can't handle hard things. Disappearing, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally, is a deeply human response to overwhelming situations. It's a survival mechanism our minds and bodies instinctively activate when the weight of life becomes too much to bear. This act of retreat isn't about weakness or failure. It's about seeking safety, often in the only way we know how at the moment. But to truly understand why we disappear, we must explore the layers of emotion and context behind this response. At its core, disappearing is a way to shield ourselves from vulnerability. Vulnerability is the space where we risk being hurt, judged, or misunderstood. It's the moment when we let others see who we are, flaws and all. And while vulnerability is essential for connection, it's also terrifying. The fear of rejection or failure can push us to withdraw, to create distance between ourselves and others, or even between ourselves and our emotions. For many, disappearing starts as a way to avoid discomfort. It might mean canceling plans, ghosting a friend, or shutting down in the middle of a difficult conversation. In these moments, stepping away feels like the safest option. It's a way to create space where we don't have to face the unknown, the potential pain, or the anxiety of being truly seen. However, the decision to disappear is rarely made in isolation. It's often influenced by our past experiences and learned behaviors. If you've ever felt dismissed, shamed, or unsupported when you tried to express yourself, the act of retreating might have become your default response. Over time, disappearing can become a pattern, a way to cope with any situation that feels too overwhelming or threatening. Disappearing isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's not about physically leaving, but emotionally withdrawing. We can disappear in plain sight, putting on a brave face while we build walls around our true selves. This invisible disappearance can be just as damaging, as it isolates us from the support and connection we need most. The challenge with disappearing as a form of self-preservation is that while it may provide temporary relief, it often creates long-term consequences. When we retreat from the discomfort of vulnerability, we also retreat from the opportunity to grow, heal, and connect. The very thing we're protecting ourselves from, pain or rejection, becomes magnified by our absence. Relationships can suffer, misunderstandings can grow, and the chance to build resilience is lost. To address this, we must reframe our understanding of vulnerability. Instead of seeing it as a threat, we need to recognize it as a strength. Vulnerability isn't about exposing ourselves recklessly. It's about choosing to be present even when it's hard. It's about acknowledging our fear and stepping forward anyway. trusting that we are capable of handling what comes next. Self-preservation is important, but disappearing doesn't have to be the answer. There's a difference between retreating to recharge and retreating to avoid. Taking intentional time to rest, reflect, and regain strength is healthy and necessary. But when we disappear out of fear or avoidance, we cut ourselves off from the very connections that make us whole. The first step in breaking this cycle is awareness. Recognize the moments when you feel the urge to disappear. Ask yourself why you're retreating and whether it's truly serving you. Are you creating space to heal, or are you avoiding a challenge that could lead to growth? Ultimately, disappearing as self-preservation is a natural response to life's difficulties. But it's not the only response. We have the power to choose differently, to stay, to speak, to face the discomfort and come out stronger on the other side. By embracing vulnerability and trusting in our own resilience, we can learn to preserve ourselves without losing ourselves in the process. And without losing ourselves in the process. When we choose to disappear, whether by withdrawing emotionally, stepping away from relationships, or removing ourselves from situations, we silence our voices. This silence often feels like a protective act. We tell ourselves that staying quiet, stepping back, or fading into the background is a way to avoid conflict, judgment, or the vulnerability of being seen. But in that silence, we lose something far greater than what we hope to protect. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the absence of connection. Human beings are wired for connection. It's at the core of who we are. From the moment we're born, we seek to be seen, heard, and understood. These are not luxuries, they are necessities. When we silence ourselves, we cut off that lifeline to connection. We deny ourselves the opportunity to express who we are and to allow others to do the same. Consider what happens when you hold back your voice in a conversation or a relationship. Maybe you've had an idea in a meeting but didn't share it, fearing it might sound foolish. Perhaps you've wanted to tell someone you're hurt by their actions but stayed silent because you didn't want to create tension. Or maybe you've hidden your true feelings in a moment of vulnerability, believing that sharing them would make you appear weak. In each of these instances, silence might seem like the safer option, but it comes at a price. By staying silent, we not only prevent others from understanding us, but we also reinforce the belief that our voices don't matter. Over time, this can erode our self-worth. When we silence ourselves repeatedly, we begin to internalize the idea that we are unworthy of being heard. This self-imposed invisibility becomes a barrier to our growth, limiting the ways we show up in the world and engage with those around us. The cost of silence is also relational. When we withdraw or stop expressing ourselves, the people around us are left to fill in the blanks. They might assume that we're indifferent, disengaged, or even hostile. In reality, our silence might stem from fear, uncertainty, or a desire to protect ourselves. But because we're not communicating, others are left guessing, and this gap in understanding can lead to misunderstandings, resentment, or even the breakdown of relationships. Furthermore, silence can stifle innovation, creativity, and progress. In group settings, when voices are absent, the diversity of thought is diminished. Imagine a team working on a project where only a few people contribute while others stay quiet out of fear or self-doubt. The team misses out on potential ideas, perspectives, and solutions that could have emerged if everyone felt empowered to speak. In a larger sense, the cost of silence extends beyond the personal and relational. Societal change depends on people raising their voices against injustice, inequality, and wrongdoing. When individuals choose silence in the face of adversity, change becomes harder to achieve. Every voice matters, not just for the individual, but for the collective good. However, breaking the silence requires courage. It involves stepping into vulnerability and embracing the possibility of discomfort. Speaking up doesn't mean being loud or confrontational. It means being authentic. It means saying what needs to be said, even if your voice shakes. To overcome the cost of silence, we must first acknowledge its presence in our lives. Ask yourself, when have I chosen silence instead of speaking my truth? What opportunities have I missed by holding back? How has my silence affected my relationships, my self-esteem, or my ability to connect with others? The antidote to silence is not necessarily volume, it's presence. It's about showing up, even when it feels uncertain or risky. It's about sharing your thoughts, feelings, and ideas, not because they're guaranteed to be perfect or well received, but because they matter. When we speak, we invite others into our world. We create the possibility for understanding, empathy, and connection. And in doing so, we also create the possibility for healing, growth, and transformation. Not just for ourselves, but for those around us. The cost of silence is high, but the value of speaking your truth is immeasurable. Your voice is not just an expression of who you are. It's a bridge to who you're meant to be and the connections you're meant to have. Choosing to use it, even in small ways, is a step toward reclaiming your power, your relationships, and your place in the world. When we step back or disappear from the lives of those around us, the impact goes far beyond our own experience. Our absence creates a void, an empty space that others inevitably feel, and in that space, uncertainty begins to grow. Disappearing, whether intentionally or unintentionally, sends ripples through our relationships, affecting not only how others perceive us, but also how they view themselves in relation to us. At its core, human connection thrives on consistency and presence. When we remove ourselves from that equation, even for a short time, it can lead to confusion, misinterpretation, and in some cases, emotional pain. Those who care about us may wonder if they've done something wrong, if they've failed to meet our expectations, or if their value in our lives is diminished. This uncertainty often leads to self-doubt and feelings of rejection, even if those weren't our intentions. Consider this. When someone you care about goes silent or withdraws, how do you interpret it? Do you assume they're busy, overwhelmed, or need space? Or does your mind wander to darker places, wondering if they're upset with you, disappointed, or choosing to walk away? This is the ripple effect at work. The void left by absence doesn't stay empty. It fills with stories we tell ourselves, and those stories are rarely accurate. The impact of our absence is especially pronounced in close relationships, family, friends, partners, and colleagues. In these connections, our presence signifies more than just physical proximity. It signals trust, investment, and care. When we disappear, it can feel like a breach of that trust, even if our reasons are justified. And for instance, imagine a team at work where one member suddenly stops engaging. They miss meetings, fail to respond to messages, and seem disinterested in ongoing projects. The rest of the team might begin to speculate. Are they unhappy with the work? Are they planning to leave? Did something happen to make them disengage? These questions create tension and unease, often leading to a breakdown in collaboration and morale. In personal relationships, the effects can be even more profound. When a friend or partner pulls away without explanation, it can trigger feelings of abandonment and insecurity. The person left behind might start to question their worth. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Why didn't they trust me enough to share what they're going through? This cycle of doubt and fear can erode even the strongest bonds over time. What's important to recognize is that the ripple effect isn't just about how others perceive our absence, it's also about how it shapes their behavior. When someone feels uncertain about a relationship, they may respond in ways that further widen the gap. They might pull back themselves, becoming less communicative or less invested, creating a cycle of mutual withdrawal. What started as a personal decision to step back can quickly escalate into a collective disconnection, all because the void was left unaddressed. This is not to say that disappearing is always a selfish act. There are times when stepping away is necessary for self-care, healing, or personal growth. However, even in these instances, it's crucial to recognize the ripple effect and take steps to minimize its unintended consequences. The first step is communication. When we feel the need to retreat, explaining our reasons to those affected can make a world of difference. A simple message like, "I'm going through a tough time and need some space, but I value our relationship and will reconnect when I'm ready," can prevent misunderstandings and reassure others of their importance in our lives. The second step is intentionality. If we know our absence might cause confusion or hurt, we can proactively address it by setting expectations. For example, if you're overwhelmed with work and can't keep up with social commitments, let your loved ones know. "I'm under a lot of pressure right now and might not be as available, but it's not because I don't care." Finally, we need to reflect on how our absence aligns with our values. Are we stepping back to protect ourselves in a healthy way? Or are we avoiding discomfort at the expense of our relationships? Sometimes the very act of disappearing is a signal that we need to face something head-on, whether it's a difficult conversation, a feeling we've been avoiding, or a situation we don't know how to handle. The ripple effect reminds us that our actions or inactions carry weight. By being mindful of the impact of our absence, we can make choices that honor both our needs and the connections we cherish. Disappearing may feel like a solitary act, but its effects are anything but isolated. It's a ripple in the pond of relationships, and every ripple eventually reaches the shore. Disappearing isn't always about running away. It's a misconception to think that when someone steps back, withdraws, or fades into the background, they're doing so out of defiance or avoidance. Often, disappearing is a complex response born out of emotional overwhelm, a sense of inadequacy, or the deeply ingrained fear of not being enough. When we choose to disappear, consciously or unconsciously, it's rarely because we don't care or because we don't want to be part of the story. More often, it's because we don't know how to show up in the midst of our struggles. The weight of shame, fear, or insecurity can make stepping forward feel impossible. Think about the times you've felt the most vulnerable. Maybe you made a mistake at work, let someone down, or felt deeply misunderstood by a friend. In those moments, the impulse to retreat, to shield yourself from scrutiny or judgment, can be overwhelming. Disappearing feels like a way to protect yourself from further pain. You think, if I'm not there, I can't be hurt. If I stay silent, I can't be criticized. It's a survival instinct rooted in our need to avoid rejection and maintain some semblance of control. But the reality is, disappearing rarely serves us in the way we hope it will. Instead of solving the problem or easing the pain, it often amplifies it. When we disappear, we leave gaps in communication, understanding, and connection. These gaps are fertile ground for misunderstanding. The people around us may interpret our absence as indifference, rejection, or even hostility. The irony is that while we're trying to protect ourselves, we may unintentionally harm the very relationships we value most. There's another layer to this. Disappearing can sometimes feel like the safer choice because it allows us to avoid the discomfort of vulnerability. Showing up, especially when we feel exposed or unsure, takes tremendous courage. It means acknowledging our imperfections and taking the risk that we might be judged, criticized, or even rejected. But it's also the only way to be truly seen and understood. Disappearing can also become a learned behavior. If in the past, withdrawing kept us safe, whether from conflict, ridicule, or failure, it can become our default response to challenges. Over time, this response can erode our confidence in our relationships. Each time we disappear, we reinforce the belief that we can't handle difficult situations, that our voices don't matter, or that it's safer to stay invisible. Yet there's a critical truth here. Disappearing is often a sign that we're struggling, not failing. It's an indicator that we need support, not judgment. Recognizing this is the first step toward changing the pattern. Instead of disappearing, we can learn to lean into discomfort, to reach out for connection, and to trust that our worth isn't tied to perfection. When we shift our perspective, we begin to see that showing up, even imperfectly, is a profound act of courage. It's not about having all the answers or being invulnerable. It's about being present even when we feel unsure or afraid. It's about saying, "Here I am, flaws and all," because I believe that being seen and connecting with others is worth the risk. This isn't easy. It takes practice, patience, and a willingness to be gentle with ourselves. It requires unlearning the belief that disappearing is the only way to stay safe, and embracing the truth that showing up is where growth and connection happen. It's a paradigm shift to consider yourself first. Take up as much space as you need to make room and growth. Ultimately, disappearing doesn't mean we're weak or incapable. It means we're human. And as humans, we have the capacity to choose differently, to step forward instead of stepping back, to engage instead of retreating, and to rewrite the narrative that tells us we're not enough. Because we are. Always. Showing up is one of the most powerful yet often underestimated acts of courage we can offer ourselves and others. It's easy to believe that we need to be fully prepared, perfectly polished, or emotionally composed before we can engage with the world around us. But the truth is, showing up isn't about being flawless. It's about being present. It's about stepping into the arena of life with all our imperfections, fears, and uncertainties and saying, "I'm here. I'm willing to try. I'm ready to connect." When we show up, especially in moments of discomfort or vulnerability, we make a statement, not just to those around us, but to ourselves. We affirm our worthiness to take up space and be part of the narrative. Too often, the fear of judgment, failure, or rejection convinces us to hold back. We tell ourselves that we'll engage when we're better, stronger, or more certain. But waiting for perfection is a trap. It keeps us stuck in inaction and isolates us from the connections and opportunities that bring meaning to our lives. Showing up doesn't mean we have to have all the answers. In fact, some of the most profound moments of connection happen when we admit that we don't. Saying, "I'm not sure, but I'm here to figure it out with you," is a powerful act of vulnerability. It's an invitation to collaborate, to build trust, and to lean into the shared humanity that binds us all. There's a myth that vulnerability is weakness, but in reality, vulnerability is strength. It takes immense courage to let others see our uncertainty, our fears, and our imperfections. When we show up in this way, we not only empower ourselves, but also give others permission to do the same. We create a space where authenticity is valued over perfection and where relationships can deepen in meaningful ways. Showing up isn't just about the big dramatic gestures. It's in the small, consistent acts that we often overlook. It's the parent who listens to their child's worries, even when they're tired. It's the friend who checks in after a hard conversation. It's the colleague who raises their hand to contribute an idea, knowing it might not be perfect. These moments of presence and engagement may seem ordinary, but they hold extraordinary power. When we choose to show up, we also take a stand against the forces that try to silence us: shame, fear, and self-doubt. These forces thrive in isolation. They convince us that we're alone in our struggles, that no one else will understand, and that hiding is safer. But when we step into the light and show up as we are, we disrupt those narratives. We prove that we're not defined by our fears or our mistakes, but by our willingness to be present and engaged. Showing up isn't always easy. There will be times when it feels like the hardest thing to do. But in those moments, it's important to remember that showing up doesn't mean being perfect. It means being present. It means saying, "This is me right now, and I'm enough. And in doing so, we not only transform our own lives, but also inspire those around us to do the same. In every interaction, in every opportunity, and in every challenge, we are faced with a choice: to disappear or to show up. By choosing the latter, we open ourselves to growth, connection, and the possibility of creating a life rich with meaning and purpose. It's not about how flawlessly we show up, but about the courage it takes to show up at all. That courage is where transformation begins. Resilience is a word we often associate with strength, endurance, and the ability to bounce back after a setback. But when we talk about resilience in the context of showing up, especially in moments when disappearing feels like the easier option, it takes on a deeper, more personal meaning. Resilience isn't just about surviving the storm. It's about staying present in the midst of it, even when everything inside us tells us to retreat. When we choose presence over disappearance, we're making a profound statement about our own capacity to handle discomfort and uncertainty. It's an act of courage to face situations that challenge our sense of control, security, or worth. Whether it's confronting a difficult conversation, staying in a relationship during a rough patch, or simply allowing ourselves to feel painful emotions, showing up requires us to trust that we can endure what's uncomfortable and come out stronger on the other side. The lesson of the story that disappearing may provide immediate relief, it's tempting to escape into the safety of silence, avoidance, or distraction when the world feels overwhelming. But this kind of withdrawal often reinforces a dangerous belief that we're not equipped to deal with life's difficulties. Over time, every act of disappearing builds a narrative in our minds that says, "I can't handle this." That belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, weakening our ability to cope with future challenges and diminishing our confidence in our own resilience. Resilience grows when we practice presence, even in small, manageable ways. For example, instead of shutting down during a disagreement, we can take a breath and stay engaged, even if it feels awkward or uncomfortable. Instead of avoiding a task because we're afraid of failure, we can take the first small step forward. These moments of choosing presence over disappearance are like lifting weights for our emotional muscles. Each time we do it, we become a little stronger, a little more capable, and a little more confident in our ability to navigate life's ups and downs. It's important to acknowledge that showing up doesn't mean we have to do it perfectly. Resilience is not about having all the answers or never feeling fear. It's about acknowledging the fear and still finding the courage to take one more step. When we show up as we are, messy, uncertain, and vulnerable, we give ourselves permission to be human. We let go of the impossible standard of perfection and embrace the reality that growth happens in the process, not in the outcome. Resilience through presence also deepens our connection with others. When we show up, we signal to the people around us that we're willing to be seen and to engage even when it's hard. This fosters trust and strengthens relationships. It also creates a ripple effect. Our courage to stay present inspires others to do the same. In moments of collective vulnerability, communities are built and healing becomes possible. The platform is a powerful resource for generational healing and relational healing. Moreover, showing up allows us to rewrite the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Presence is a practice, and like any practice, it requires intention and effort. It's not about being perfect every time. It's about making the choice to stay just a little longer, to lean in a little further, to trust ourselves a little more. Over time, these small acts of presence accumulate into a resilience that doesn't just help us survive, but allows us to thrive. Resilience through presence is about reclaiming our power. It's about saying to ourselves, "I am capable. I am enough. I can handle this." And every time we choose to show up, we're proving to ourselves that these statements are true.